And Rome literally lives and breathes its history and wears it openly and proudly on its sleeve.
Imagine standing on a windswept Scottish hillside, watching archaeologists unearth a secret that's haunted historians for almost 2,000 years. The disappearance of Rome's Ninth Legion was more than a battlefield mystery. It was a scandal so big, the empire tried to erase it from history itself. Now, a shocking discovery in 2025 finally reveals the truth behind the legend. And what happened is far darker than anyone imagined. What did they find beneath the earth? And why did Rome go to such lengths to keep it buried? The shadow over Rome. No riddle of ancient history feels as suffocating as the fate of Rome's legendary Ninth Legion Hispana. Nearly 2,000 years later, their disappearance remains a wound in the record books, a scar that refuses to heal. The Ninth was no ordinary garrison. This was an elite unit, forged in the crucible of Julius Caesar's blood-soaked campaigns and tempered by countless rebellions and frontier wars. Their boots stomped across continents. Their banners once struck fear from the highlands of Britannia to the sun-baked deserts of Spain. But then, almost overnight, it was as if the earth swallowed them whole. No final salute, no funerary rites, no last roster, only a vacuum where memory should have been. What kind of force simply vanishes from the heart of the greatest empire the world had ever seen? To understand the magnitude of this mystery, you have to appreciate how the Ninth came to represent the sharpest edge of Rome's ambition. Whenever the empire needed a message delivered in blood rather than parchment, the Ninth went in first. They built their reputation on stubborn survival, quelling revolts, crossing the Rhine, storming through foggy Britannia, where every shadow could hold a spear. Their posting at Iberacum, modern-day York, put them at the northern tip of Roman civilization, pressed hard against lands that refused to kneel. That was not a reward. It was a test, and everyone knew the Ninth was being dared to break. The details are haunting. The last solid proof of the Ninth's existence is not some grand monument, but a mundane slab of stone dug up near York, recording a routine construction project. Their name appears, faded but legible, in the year 108. After that, the paper trail turns to smoke. It is as if the chroniclers stopped mid-sentence. The military lists, usually as methodical as an accountant's ledger, suddenly skip a number. Stone tablets, where their name should have echoed in perpetuity, are blank, chiseled over, or broken. Even the towering Hadrian's Wall, built soon after, offers no mention of the Ninth. Was this carelessness, or was someone trying to erase a mistake? Who benefits from forgetting a legion? As the years slipped by, the silence only grew louder. Historians and treasure hunters started to circle, following rumors, digging in bogs and forests, desperate to uncover a single sign of what happened. Some were convinced the Ninth had been redeployed, sent east to be broken in some forgotten desert. Others were certain they had been destroyed to a man in the wilds of the north. But every theory had a hole. Rome kept track of its dead, especially when whole legions were wiped out. Why would the Ninth alone disappear so completely? Why did official histories suddenly stop acknowledging their existence, almost as if it would be dangerous to remember them at all? For ordinary people in Britain, the Ninth's story became a kind of bedtime horror story, whispered on stormy nights. Roman soldiers, it was said, had marched into the mists and were never seen again. Some believed the highlands themselves swallowed the men, while others thought the legion had been cursed by druids, doomed to wander eternally as spirits. Was this just superstition, or did these legends conceal a deeper truth? one that Rome dared not reveal. Fast forward to the present. In the digital age, technology has begun to pry secrets from the ground that parchment and rumor could never reveal. In January 2025, a team flying a drone over the windswept cairngorms of Scotland picked up an anomaly, a shape beneath the peat, too geometric to be natural. When spectral imaging software peeled away the layers of soil, a massive rectangular outline came into view, far larger than any known Roman camp. Was this just a fluke of geology, or the long-buried grave of the 9th? With the world's eyes suddenly glued to a remote Scottish hillside, a team of archaeologists swept in, their anticipation sharpened by decades of speculation. Would they finally uncover the 9th's fate, or just add one more chapter of confusion? Initial digs revealed the telltale signs of a Roman presence: scattered hobnails, battered shields, spear points bent by brutal force. What began as a curious blip on a scanner was quickly turning into something much darker. The layout of the site was chaotic, not the orderly grid expected from Rome's military machine. The defensive ditches were deep but hastily made. Ramparts bulged and buckled as if built in panic. All the hallmarks pointed to a desperate last stand. The deeper the team dug, the stranger it got. Human bones, hundreds of them, surfaced, jumbled together, some bearing marks of violent death, others arranged as if for ritual. Near the camp's heart, they found a ring of charred stones and blackened soil. Was this evidence of a funeral pyre, or something meant to erase identity altogether? Why had the survivors gone to such lengths to cover their tracks? The artifacts spoke of chaos. Officers' signet rings snapped, wax tablets burned, children's shoes half buried in mud. This was not just defeat. This was obliteration. What force could bring the might of Rome to its knees and convince an empire to forget it had ever happened? And so, with every artifact unearthed, the questions multiplied. Was the 9th destroyed by a sudden ambush, betrayed by its own commanders, or abandoned as a scapegoat to cover up a political disaster? What did the empire have to hide that was so terrible? It required not only physical destruction, but the burial of memory itself. Was this the work of Rome's enemies, or the result of a decision made in some shadowy corner of the Senate? As the sun set over the excavated camp and the world's media crowded the edge of the pit, one truth became impossible to ignore. The legend of the 9th Legion was about to be rewritten. Their story was not finished. It was only just beginning to claw its way out of the mud and stone. But before the world could make sense of what truly happened to these men, one crucial fact remained. The answer lay not only in the artifacts, but in the shadows of empire. What secret was so dangerous that Rome would wipe away every trace? What disaster was so complete that it could only be buried beneath centuries of silence? And now, as the pieces of the past come together, the stage is set for the greatest twist of all. A discovery so shocking, it would force historians, politicians, and the public to rethink everything they thought they knew. Not just about the 9th, but about the very foundations of empire. If you thought a legion could vanish without consequence, you're about to find out what it really means when Rome tries to erase its own ghosts. The cover-up nobody saw coming. If the 9th Legion's last moments were shrouded in mist, the years that followed were a labyrinth of secrecy, cover-ups, and strange silences echoing from the highest halls of Roman power. Historians once believed that all records had been lost by chance, perhaps destroyed in some fire or shuffled away by neglect. Yet as archaeologists began to piece together the evidence uncovered in Scotland, a chilling pattern began to emerge. A pattern pointing not to a forgotten accident, but to a deliberate act of erasure orchestrated by people with everything to lose. It began with a simple observation that sent shivers down the spines of seasoned researchers. Rome did not simply lose legions. When disaster struck, it mourned, it built monuments, it carved names into marble so that the living would always remember the sacrifice. After the annihilation at Teutoburg Forest, when 3 whole legions were massacred, the emperor himself led national mourning. Shrines were raised, coins were minted, commanders were tried for incompetence, and survivors were either honored or publicly disgraced. Every scar was catalogued, every lost banner grieved. The pain of loss was public, loud, impossible to ignore. But for the 9th, there was only silence. No mention in the Senate's minutes, no mournful poetry, no angry speeches, no efforts to recruit replacements. It was as if the very existence of the 9th Legion had become an uncomfortable secret. Was it possible that Rome had suffered a disaster so humiliating, so politically toxic, that it could only be handled by pretending it never happened? This question led modern researchers back into the archives, and what they found in the Senate's private records changed everything. Buried in faded ink and bureaucratic jargon were brief but disturbing references to exceptional losses in northern Britain, orders for restructuring the garrisons, and, most chillingly, notes about a unit exempted from memorialization. These cryptic lines stood out against the normally exhaustive record-keeping of the Roman bureaucracy. Who issued such orders, and what could have happened to force the empire's hand? To get closer to the truth, historians had to dig deeper into the political storm that swirled around the empire during the early 2nd century. Rome's frontiers were never static. Emperors rose and fell on their ability to expand borders, or failing that, to keep them from crumbling. The years after Trajan's death were marked by anxiety, with power shifting and enemies probing every weak spot. In this environment, losing a seasoned legion was more than a setback. It was a potential scandal, the kind of thing that could topple reputations and bring the entire edifice of imperial power crashing down. The 9th was posted at Eboracum at a time when the north of Britain was seething with unrest. Caledonian tribes refused to bow. Raiders slipped through the forests at night, striking supply trains and disappearing before the Romans could even organize a response. Each year, Rome poured more men and money into the region, and still, the frontier seemed to recede like a tide. When the 9th vanished from the records, it was against a backdrop of paranoia and political intrigue in Rome. There were whispers of a power struggle, of generals plotting in shadowy corners, of an emperor desperate to avoid looking weak in front of his rivals. But the most damning piece of evidence surfaced not in a palace or a Senate chamber, but in the muddy, rain-soaked hills where the drone had found its mysterious outline. During excavation, archaeologists uncovered a battered, half-burned wax tablet. Its Latin was hurried, the writing shaky, but the message was unmistakable. It was a field report, addressed to a high-ranking official back in Rome. The officer writing it was terrified. He spoke of encirclement, of supply lines cut by barbarian alliances, of renenmanami, and of morale collapsing as men realized they had been left to fight alone. Most shocking of all, he wrote, orders from Eboracum did not arrive. Our pleas for support were unanswered. I fear we have been abandoned, not by the enemy, but by our own. Why would anyone in Rome risk such a thing? The answer, some scholars argue, lay in the internal politics of the time. The 9th had been fiercely loyal to its own commanders, many of whom were old guard soldiers with deep ties to the traditions of the Republic. As the empire evolved, these officers became increasingly out of step with the new order, more likely to challenge the emperor than blindly obey. Could it be that the 9th had been marked not for defeat by foreign enemies, but for isolation by Roman politics? Was this legion set up as a scapegoat, an example to others of what happened to those who failed to adapt to the changing tides? The archaeological site offered more hints. The encampment was not just a battlefield. It had the look of a fortress, hastily constructed by men who knew relief was not coming. There were shallow mass graves, shields stacked as barricades. The remains of bonfires meant more for warmth than celebration. The few trinkets and keepsakes buried with the dead suggested a desperate final stand, men clinging to identity as the world closed in. The defensive works had been slashed apart by weapons of a type unfamiliar to Roman hands. Broad-bladed, wickedly carved, likely the product of northern smiths. Evidence of mutilation and ritual destruction spoke of a conflict that was as much about spiritual domination as military victory. Yet, it was the absence that struck hardest. No funerary inscriptions, no tributes from the survivors, no attempt to retrieve the legion's standards. In Roman culture, the eagle standard was everything, a living symbol of Rome itself. To lose it was the greatest dishonor. To leave it behind was unthinkable. At the dig site, only a fragment was found, blackened and twisted, as if someone had tried to erase even the memory of what it once meant. And so, the mystery deepened. Had the ninth been sacrificed to political expediency, their destruction sealed and forgotten to protect the ambitions of men far from the front lines? Was their end the result of arrogance, neglect, or cold calculation? Why did the Senate go to such lengths to keep this story hidden from the world? As the investigation continued, a new and more disturbing possibility took shape, one that would cast an even darker shadow over the story. What if the Ninth's annihilation was not just a military failure, but a deliberate act meant to snuff out the spark of rebellion within the empire itself? Some researchers began to see signs that the Legion had grown too close to local auxiliaries, perhaps even to the point of being seen as a liability by the powers in Rome. The fear of ideological contamination, of a proud Roman unit going native, was more than enough to inspire drastic measures. If this is true, then the Ninth did not simply vanish. They were erased, not by enemies, but by their own side. Their fate became a warning, one that echoed down through the centuries. In Rome, loyalty was demanded, but never guaranteed. The line between hero and traitor could shift with a single stroke of a senator's pen. All of this, of course, raises the ultimate question. If the cover-up was so complete, how did even a fragment of the truth survive to be found in 2025? Was it mere luck, or did someone long ago leave a trail of breadcrumbs, hoping that one day the story would be unearthed? What other secrets still sleep in the peat and stone, waiting for a new age of discovery to bring them to light? As the world digests these revelations, the implications ripple far beyond the study of ancient warfare. What happened to the Ninth is not just the story of a lost legion. It is the story of how empires manage failure, how they manipulate memory, and how even the greatest powers can crumble when their foundations are built on secrets. But as investigators pore over every artifact, every line of ancient text, a new lead emerges. Something buried even deeper than the remains of a lost legion. Something that hints at a conspiracy grander and more chilling than anyone expected. Just when it seemed like the story could not get any darker, a single artifact surfaces, an object so out of place, so loaded with meaning, that it threatens to blow the lid off centuries of speculation. If you think you know how the story of the Ninth ends, think again, because beneath the ashes of this cover-up lies a final twist, and what is revealed next may turn everything we thought we knew about Rome's power, its pride, and its paranoia upside down. Bones, betrayal, and the legacy no one wanted. As summer sunlight filtered down through the shifting Scottish clouds, teams of researchers continued their slow, careful work in the bogs and forests. The dig site, once a simple blip on a drone's scanner, had transformed into the epicenter of a historical reckoning that reached far beyond Britain's borders. Each new day brought fresh fragments of armor, decayed Roman leatherwork, and, most unsettling of all, the bones of men whose lives and deaths had been scrubbed from the storybooks for nearly 2 millennia. What set this chapter apart from all that had come before was not just the sheer scale of the evidence, but the way the story seemed to grow more tangled with every layer uncovered. It was not just a massacre. It was not just a defeat. It was a carefully orchestrated annihilation, followed by a centuries-long game of silence, subterfuge, and strategic forgetting. Yet, as the excavation expanded, it became painfully clear that the truth had been hiding in plain sight, whispering through the soil, waiting for the world to finally listen. In early May, a discovery by the riverbank set off a new wave of speculation. A mass burial, deliberately dug, contained over 200 skeletons, almost all stripped of weapons and armor, their hands bound behind their backs. The arrangement was methodical, even ritualistic, with evidence of execution and mutilation. This was not a battlefield's chaos, but an act of psychological warfare, a clear message to Rome and all who might follow. Interspersed among the bones were fragments of the 9th Eagle Standard and coins minted during the reign of Hadrian, offering the clearest timestamp yet. Archaeologists and historians swarmed the site, testing, dating, and arguing over each fragment of bone and scrap of cloth. The initial forensic analysis was damning. Most of the soldiers had died not in a single desperate charge, but through systematic, controlled executions. Some skulls bore sharp puncture wounds consistent with a ceremonial blade used in ancient Caledonian rites. Others showed evidence of blunt force trauma, their faces smashed beyond recognition. It was, by any standard, an act of cultural erasure, a violence not just against men, but against memory itself. For weeks, every media outlet in the world ran with the story, each headline more breathless than the last. Commentators wondered aloud whether this was truly the fate of the 9th or some other lost Roman force. But then a new bombshell emerged, making the mystery even harder to dismiss. Buried beneath a pile of shattered pottery was a bronze signet ring. Its face bore the unmistakable insignia of the Legion 9th Hispana, 2 crossed spears beneath a stylized boar, a symbol known from countless earlier finds but never before unearthed this far north. The discovery made it official. The 9th Legion had ended here, in a place the Empire had long sought to forget. As teams poured through the dig's findings, the question of who ordered such a cover-up took center stage. Some pointed to Hadrian himself, the emperor whose obsession with order and stability was matched only by his willingness to discard what he could not control. Others argued that the Senate, panicked by rumors of mutiny and native alliances, had orchestrated the 9th's doom as a grim warning to anyone who thought of blending Roman discipline with local customs. One thing was certain. The people in charge wanted this story dead, and they had nearly succeeded. But why? Why would the Empire go to such lengths to erase not just a defeat, but the very existence of one of its most storied legions? Some historians began to point to a new and darker theory, pieced together from hints in recovered Senate scrolls and imperial decrees. The 9th, it appeared, had grown dangerously independent. Some of its officers had married into local families. Its rank and file had adopted tribal customs, perhaps even embracing the spirituality of their supposed enemies. Rumors hinted that the Ninth was no longer purely Roman, but had become a kind of hybrid force, one foot in the empire, the other in the highlands. The implications were explosive. In an age when Rome's greatest fear was not foreign invasion, but internal weakness, the thought of a legion going rogue was unthinkable. If word got out that soldiers could be corrupted by the peoples they were sent to conquer, then no border would ever truly be safe. The best way to prevent that narrative from spreading was to make the Ninth disappear entirely, their heroism unmentioned, their defeat unmemorialized. As if to drive this point home, the forensic team at Oxford discovered something almost too perfect to believe. Embedded in the grave's wall was a twisted scrap of bronze, part of a military diploma. The name inscribed was that of a standard-bearer known from earlier Roman records, a man awarded for valor in battle. Yet, the diploma had been intentionally defaced, its most important details gouged away, as if someone wanted to erase not just his identity, but the very idea of reward or recognition. This pattern repeated throughout the site. Smashed sword hilts, broken shields, trinkets destroyed and scattered among animal bones, an attempt, perhaps, to strip away any power that might linger in memory or artifact. At the foot of the grave, the eagle standard lay upside down, a symbol of ultimate dishonor in the Roman worldview. Nearby, a circle of blackened stones suggested some kind of ritual had been performed, likely by the victors, to ensure the spirits of the Ninth would never trouble the highlands again. For the Caledonians, this was not just a military victory. It was a spiritual cleansing, the ultimate banishment of foreign power from their sacred land. For Rome, it was a humiliation so complete that it could never be allowed to see the light of day. But here, in 2025, with cameras and forensic teams capturing every detail, the ghosts of the Ninth were speaking louder than ever. The fallout was immediate. Across Britain, public interest in Roman history surged. Museum exhibitions were hastily revised, textbooks rewritten, and politicians weighed in on the meaning of the Ninth's fate. For some, it was a reminder of imperial hubris, the danger of trying to erase inconvenient truths. For others, especially in Scotland, it became a rallying cry for local identity, a story of how the barbarians had outwitted and outlasted the world's most powerful military machine. Internationally, the discovery rippled through the worlds of military history and intelligence. Defense analysts began to draw lessons from the collapse of the Ninth, seeing parallels in modern wars where armies have been lost, not through defeat in open battle, but through cultural drift, divided loyalties, and psychological attrition. NATO even circulated a confidential report titled Lessons from the Highlands, suggesting that the story of the Ninth offered a cautionary tale for every nation tempted to overreach in foreign lands. Yet for all the headlines, arguments, and finger-pointing, the most haunting aspect of the discovery lay in the silences it exposed. The Ninth did not die as traitors nor as martyrs, but as victims of a world that could not accept their complexity. They were erased not because they failed, but because their story threatened the neat lines drawn by power. They were a force that did not fit, and so they were made to disappear. But now, after so many centuries, the Ninth Legion's voices have broken through the silence. Their bones, their tokens, and their stories will not be hidden again. As visitors gather at the new memorial built beside the bog, they are left with questions that Rome itself never dared to answer. How many other stories lie buried, not just beneath the earth, but beneath layers of politics, pride, and fear? What else is waiting to be found? And can any empire truly erase the truth forever? Even now, as the Scottish winds sweep over the site and the world digests what has been revealed, one thing is certain. The legend of the Ninth Legion has finally been restored, not as a tale of mystery, but as a testament to the dangers of secrecy, the power of memory, and the enduring pull of the past. If this is what came from one lost battalion, what secrets might the rest of history still be hiding in plain sight? The Ninth Legion's final lesson. In the end, the saga of Rome's lost Ninth Legion reveals far more than the fate of a vanished battalion. What began as a legend, whispered through the centuries in ruined fortresses and rain-swept highlands, has become a mirror for every era that came after. For nearly 2,000 years, scholars, soldiers, and dreamers have hunted for a simple answer. How could a force so mighty, so storied, simply disappear without a trace? Now, with bones unearthed and secrets forced into the light, we see that the Ninth's erasure was never just about military failure. It was a calculated act of political survival, a cover-up driven by the fear of chaos inside the Empire's own walls. Their final march into the mists of Caledonia was not only a tactical disaster, but a spiritual reckoning for both Rome and the people they sought to rule. The true lesson is not found in the number of swords or the might of walls, but in the way memory is weaponized by those in power. The Ninth story was erased not because it was shameful, but because it was dangerous. A reminder that even the greatest empire could be humbled by its own uncertainty. This mystery's resolution unsettles more than it comforts. It shows us how quickly the line between history and propaganda can blur, how the stories we inherit are always filtered through the agendas of those who survived to tell them. The truth does not always march triumphantly through the centuries. Often it is left to molder in the soil, waiting for the right moment to resurface. The shattered shields and battered eagle standard found beneath the Scottish earth speak for all lost voices, and for every inconvenient fact deliberately buried by empires desperate to save face. What else has the world forgotten, buried beneath silence and shadow? Who will have the courage to dig deeper, to question what seems certain, when the next lost chapter comes to light? In the end, the Ninth Legion's story is a warning and an invitation. It urges us never to accept silence as the final answer, and to remember that even when truth is covered up, it has a way of demanding to be heard, no matter how many centuries it must wait. If the fate of Rome's most mysterious legion can be hidden for centuries, what other secrets still wait in the dark corners of our past? Could there be more untold stories buried just out of sight, shaping the world we live in without us even realizing? Let us know in the comments which historical mystery you want to see solved next, or share your theory about the Ninth's last stand. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into the hidden truths that history tried to erase. Until next time, keep questioning, keep digging, and remember, sometimes the greatest stories are the ones the world never wanted you to hear.